All right, everyone, and welcome back to the 10th episode of The Adventures in the Monk and the Monarch, with me, the Monarch, and our co-host, Mildra the Monk.
Hello!
While we will stick largely to anime-focused topics, or at least things related to anime, we're taking a little departure today, and we'll be talking about classes in Pathfinder 1st Edition. We're going to be ranking them. We'll get into all those details once we actually start the topic proper. For now, let's talk about what we've been watching this past month.
I know I'm jumping on the bandwagon a bit. I did run through Cyberpunk Edge Runners.
One of the few times we've both sat down and watched the same show.
There's a few things that I find amusing regarding this, because I'm approaching this from the perspective of somebody who's been a longtime fan of Cyberpunk 2020 and tolerated Cyberpunk 3rd Edition. Just for the summary on that, Cyberpunk 3rd Edition is in the hall of we don't talk about that. Kind of like Devil May Cry 2, or that weird-ass Virtua Fighter that was on the Dreamcast, which wasn't very good.
Whereas I'm coming from this with someone who's never really been involved in like any of the Cyberpunk tabletop RPGs. The closest was I was almost in a Shadowrun game that just ended up not happening. And
Shadowrun's a completely different beast. Both.
Yeah.
Looking at the observations, there's a few things I couldn't help but note. One from some of the more old school of my colleagues. Some people are like, why are we putting Cyberpunk through this weeb shit? I'm like, do you have any idea how much of a massive weeb Pondsmith was and still is? Let me reference some of Pondsmith's other work under our Tessorian games. Teenagers from Outer Space, which is blatantly inspired by Utsure Yatsura. Mechton Zeta, which is one of the premier mech anime TTRPGs. There's also the fact that one of the characters in Cyberpunk, Morgan Blackhand, is kind of his own XP of the solo archetype. He did a steampunk card-based TTRPG called Castle Falkenstein. Or is it Falkenstein? I can never tell. His son had talked him into doing the Witcher RPG, which is more in line with the video games than it is with the Netflix series. This might be a bit harsh, but I do feel like a lot of people, especially when it comes to anime, have a very limited view of cyberpunk. I think a lot of people's idea of cyberpunk begins and ends with Ghost in the Shell. And don't get me wrong, I like Ghost in the Shell, but Ghost in the Shell strikes me more as transhumanist science fiction than it does cyberpunk. A lot of people focus on the cyber and not on the punk.
I'll say I've not watched a lot of anime that kind of fall into that category, the occasional one. It's not something I've ever really felt the need to jump too much into. I've definitely seen some. It's never been something I've gone out of my way to watch. But yeah, the anime itself, I think I'm not as big on it as a lot of people are. Like, I thought it had, like, the first 4 episodes had me hooked. I was engaged. The longer it went, the less I gave a fuck about anything happening.
To each their own, although yeah. I will note I did get a bit of amusement at who handled the soundtrack.
Okay.
Akira Yamaoka.
Yeah. As far as that soundtrack. See, I love Franz Ferdinand. They're actually one of my favorite bands, but I don't know what the fuck this fire was doing opening this show.
I don't think it's any less weird than Girls on Film from Duran Duran being used as the opening for Speed Grapher. And actually, a song like This Fire does make sense for Cyberpunk, because remember that another name for Cyberpunks in Night City is Edge Runners. There's always been that life on the razor attitude when it comes to Cyberpunk. It would be too kind of me to call it a shithole.
Look, I'm not saying it's the worst opening theme for a show. I think that might still go to Big O, which I love Big O. I like the opening theme. Those two things do not go together.
Like, if you ever listen to the full opening, it's very clear that that they wanted to be Queen.
I will say, like, though, I thought the whole series looks fantastic. Like, beginning to end, I love the visuals. I think it does a good job with the themes. I just don't really care about most of the characters, and by the halfway point, I'm like, I don't care what happens to these people. I do realize that's a little That's a bit more me, though, and what I'm looking for in my show. But it's not a bad show by any stretch. Like, I enjoyed watching the whole time. Glad I saw it.
Some people have done videos where they've pointed out scenes in the show and where they are in 2077's version of Night City.
Yeah, the attention to detail was great here.
I did get a bit of a laugh when it came to the Rebecca story.
There is part of me that likes that more than the show itself.
It's never confirmed, but I do have to wonder if Rebecca was a former member, was at one point a member of the Mox gang. The other thing I couldn't that gave me a bit of a kick as just a music nerd is the track that's used during the assault on Arasaka Tower. That is a track by Health, which is a very interesting noise rock band from LA. A lot of gamers might recognize them as the people who did the soundtrack for Max Payne 3.
Other than Cyberpunk, one of the things I also got around to doing this past month is I made it through the Ennis Lobby and post-Ennis Lobby's arc of One Piece. Now here's the thing. I don't know if it's just me getting older is making me softer. I got a little misty-eyed at like 3 different points in this story arc. This show has me giving a fuck about a stupid goddamn boat. I love that boat. Frankie's moved up to probably my 3rd favorite character.
The only downside when it comes to One Piece is One Piece is one of those shows that's more difficult to dub than people would realize. Largely because a lot of the verbal tics that characters have don't quite work in English, and Frankie is one such case.
I will say, like, I've seen people try to argue online, like, whether or not you can start One Piece at any arc, whether or not you need to start from the beginning. This is the conclusion I have come to. Ignoring the weird bits where it's the same story split into multiple arcs, like Water 7 and Ennis Lobby, you can jump in at any arc, but you're missing a lot of context that's not really going to be explained. Like, the whole thing with the boat. Yes, even if you started at Water 7, I'm sure there's a degree that show is going to get you invested in what's going on with that boat. But to have spent 200 episodes with that boat, the whole bit with the spirit of the boat coming out, and seeing it slowly over time just become more and more beat up with their rough shot fixes, I think it makes that whole bit hit so much harder if you'd been there from the beginning.
I know some people would look at the episode count and say that it's way too much to ask for somebody to start from the beginning.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next arc when Brooke finally shows up.
Oh,
I don't know what to think about Brooke yet. I just know what he looks like.
Brooke he fits in. that is all I can really say, and it's not me trying to hold things off because I don't want to spoil. No, it's a case of Brooke is what would happen if you animated dad jokes.
Okay. I'm looking forward to this. After One Piece, I know I'm late to this party. I finally watched the Goblin Slayer's Goblin Crown.
The Goblin Crown movie it's good enough.
It's a high budget episode. That said, I was entirely okay with that. Like, if I were to compare it to the series, I prefer what I've seen in the series. But you get a big action movie with a higher budget of goblin murder.
Sometimes you don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's why I said that Goblin's Crown is good enough.
Yeah.
In engineering, never underestimate the power of good enough. Because plenty of people have tried to make a perfect output and end up making something worse. I have been watching Record of Ragnarok. The whole thing of a battle between mortals throughout history and the gods. Going through it has been a breeze. The problem is we like to riff on the shows as we watch them. So watching a fighting tournament that has some of the characters riffing on what they see kind of puts us out of a job. But like if we weren't operating on a strict 3 episodes per week policy, we probably would have blitzed through the whole thing in 2 days, at least so far. Also, it's opening. I had to double check because it sounded like Loudness did it.
Now, is this like a legitimately good show or just one of those "what the fuck am I watching? This is enjoyable" things?
Yes. Here's the thing: if you're going to be ridiculous, do not half-ass it.
You gotta commit.
The first battle is between Thor and Lu Bu.
I mean, how else are you going to start this show off?
In the crowds are members of Lu Bu's army.
Okay, I have definitely not seen this one. Because I think I would remember that.
Although the whole time I kept looking at Guan Yu and going, "Why do you look like a robot?" The only time I cried foul when it came to the first 3 episodes was when they showed a flashback of Asgard and one of the gods looked like Tyr, and I called foul because he has both hands. If you're not familiar with Norse mythology, Tyr is known as the Bloody-Handed. He's the guy who let his hand get bitten off by Fenrir so that Fenrir could be bound. So on one of his hands, he's supposed to have a stump. Of course, Thor has red hair, as the gods intended. Anyone who tells you that Thor is blonde doesn't know what they're talking about, or is probably an MCU stan. In which case, point and laugh at them. That's been what I've gone through.
Similarly to that, just on the premise of just finding something ridiculous and just committing to that. Just this random movie that showed up on like High Dive, Kaiju Girls Black. I know nothing about the Kaiju Girls thing. Like, apparently there's some other shows, and all of these girls are like references to Ultraman, I think. But effectively, all the girls here are like reborn kaiju with like portions of these kaiju powers. Now, in this world where someone can create a black hole and suck people into the X zone, someone has like all these horrifyingly powerful tentacles. There's this one girl who can generate all kinds of toxins, and they're using these great and marvelous powers to kind of harass people on the street, annoy an idol group full of kaiju girls, and one of their members was basically kidnapped and forced to join them. But when she realizes how stupid these people are, despite knowing how stupid her cohorts are, she's like, you know what? This is fun. I'm going to fully commit to this nonsense. She's like an in-character embodiment of just committing to the absurdity. And I kind of love this movie for that. I do have 2 others to quickly go over. I did watch the next season of Made in Abyss. Like, we talked a bit about this last time from the movie, so I won't go too much into this. Season 2 is kind of taken like that scientific-esque logic that would be applied to going through. That's gone now. And I don't think that's really a bad thing, because on the second season of Made in Abyss, they've crossed the point where you can no longer go back up and still be human. So the odd tone change in that regard kind of works. But it can take a second to get used to. Other than that, anything else I've said about Made in Abyss already still holds true to the second season. Only other thing I watched was Lycoris Recoil, which is probably going to be one of my favorite shows of this year. It's like, you've got the whole idea that Japan's a peaceful society, but it's basically viewed as the most peaceful society because of the Lycoris team, which is a bunch of high school girls, basically. They're trained killers. They can move around town in just like a high schoolish looking uniform and not stand out. And they're just like shutting down crimes before they can really go off. Terrorist incidents are passed off as just accidents. I kind of like settings like that, where you got like just the government cover up, similar to like what you'd see in Psychopaths, but you know it's a bunch of murderous high school girls. It's one I don't want to go into too much detail on, just because all the best stuff are like spoiling the plot twists. But if you don't have that weird dissonance of like just a lot of really cute, over-the-top slice of life stuff mixed with some pretty high intensive action, you might not like this one. Plus, you know, it's one of those shows you can watch this season, story's done. They might do more with it, but even if it never comes back, the story they were telling here is finished. So you got a 1-season anime. That out of the way, let's get on to the topic of ranking Pathfinder classes. First edition specifically.
We need to make clear the kind of grading metric that we're using. It is not necessarily about how good or bad a given class is, because we can argue about optimized builds back and forth until the cows come home. Yeah. There's way too many moving parts. Even though we're using the standard grading setup that you see in any tier maker, this will be rooted around how much a given class can contribute. So the high tier can do multiple things very well. The low tier can only do one thing, and that one thing they're not all that good at.
Some of you are going to notice there's an odd image on this list. That image is I actually have the screenshot of Lycris Recoil on there. And that is because just before this stream, I realized I was missing a picture of a class, and for some reason I was struggling to find a Vigilante picture. So this just got dragged in, so yeah, every class is like the official image you can grep from Paizo, except that one. And I'm sure they've been wondering this whole time because it's going to be on screen.
Now, the other thing that I want to make clear, we may talk a bit about the archetypes, but we're not going to be covering them in detail because there's way too many.
Oh yeah. The only time I'm really going to bring it up is if it's really important, but it's only going to be a couple instances of that, I think.
And the Occult Adventures classes, we will not be covering in this because, while I have experience with them,
I do not.
Monarch here does not.
I own the book. I have never sat down and read through it.
Since we're basing our grading system on the Brilliant Gamesologist tier system, I'd like to go into the grades and what it means, so you can kind of get an idea. Ds are only able to are capable of doing one thing and not all that well, or they're ridiculously unfocused. They have difficulty shining in an encounter unless it matches their strengths. C, they're able to do one thing pretty well, but outside of that area of expertise, they're not that great. Bs, they're able to do one thing pretty well, and when they're outside of that one thing, they're all right. A lot of jack of all trades archetypes are probably going to fall into this. A's have the raw power of S's, but don't have as many tricks. And S's are those ones who can do just about everything, sometimes better than the specialists, and sometimes can be entire parties all by themselves.
I'm sure anyone coming in here with any experience with Pathfinder or 3rd edition may have at some point heard the phrase Codzilla, your cleric or druidzilla.
You'll especially have heard it if you listen to my show, because we use that term a lot. The other thing is that all of the hybrid classes, we're not doing those.
Like, I like the hybrid classes, but they're kind of built explicitly to have all these different weird abilities and expand as much as they can.
They are by all accounts kit bashes of two other classes. So covering them would be a little bit redundant. We're starting with the Barbarian. I will say, when you compare it to the 3.5 Barbarian, the Pathfinder Barbarian is a cut above. And
just sheer melee damage output, it's very hard to get over the Barbarian.
I would consider Barbarians a C.
Yeah, I'd like to say they're a B, but they can't. They do have some nice skills that they have access to, some interesting stuff from their rage. So I do think they have a decent amount of versatility, but yeah, nothing's going to really... You're not going to look at a Barbarian and expect anything out of damage output, regardless of how they're built.
Yeah.
They got that one trick and they do it very well.
Main reason for that is that it's... Barbarian is certainly very good among the beat sticks, and it is certainly more versatile than the 3.5 one, even if some of the rage powers could be amusing, like say a rage using rage powers to give yourself a bonus to swim checks. They did kind of get screwed over in 2014 when the Blood Rager came out.
Oh yeah, that was one of the hybrid classes.
Because why play a barbarian when you can play a barbarian who can not only get angry but can get new forms of natural attack, possibly wings, and dip into sorcery. And of course, it gets even worse if you bring in the Primalist, because somebody decided, hey, the barbarian doesn't have enough rage powers.
Look, I love the addition of the rage powers just because it gave you a bit more you can do as a barbarian, but there's some goofy stuff in there.
Yeah. As far as the Unchained version of the barbarian,
I've not had any experience with someone playing the Unchained barbarian. It seems fine. Like, I didn't see anything on Unchained that would make me go, yeah, this deserves to be in a different tier now. Like, it's still fine.
And this is a problem you see with a lot of the Unchained classes. They're not compatible with the barbarian with the prime archetypes.
Yeah.
So a lot of the versatility ends up going out the window. Unchained barbarian, I look at as a side grade.
Yeah,
at best.
Yeah, like with 3 of the Unchained classes, like Barbarian, Monk, and Rogue, when I'm running a game, like, look, pick which one version of those you want. I'm basically just looking at the Unchained largely as an expanded archetype. It's a little different with the Summoner, but we'll get to that. So yeah, with our Barbarian pretty firmly at a C. Do you just want to go down this list alphabetically? Do the core classes and then the base?
Yeah.
Alright. Next up,
yeah,
we have the Bard then.
Okay.
I love bards.
Keep it in your pants.
I've always loved the bards.
The bards have a bit of a bad rap because of the fact that it's trying to be a jack of many trades class in a game that is designed around specialization. The Pathfinder Bard isn't my favorite iteration of Bard. That honor still goes to 13th Age, but I would say Pathfinder Bards are a B.
I think they did much better than the 3rd edition Bard did.
Inspire Courage scales a lot better than it did in 3.5, especially since you get it at 5th instead of 8th. You don't have the sync when it comes to having performance for most of the bardic music. Somebody who knows what they're doing, especially with versatile performance,
you can outscale
this. Yeah,
it's
by level 10 you'll have more skill points than the rogue.
It is ridiculous the amount of skills you get as a bard. I kind of don't think they should have that many versatile performances because of that.
Then once the splat books came out, the versatility got more ridiculous once we bring in masterpieces. Yeah. There are 2 masterpieces that will always stick out to me. The first one is Pageant of the Peacock, where you could use bluff for any intelligence-based skill. If that doesn't scream ultimate skill monkey, I don't know what does. And all that you're giving up is a spell slot.
I'm going to feel bad because I feel like we're going to be dropping Rogue and C, aren't we? It'll be a while. It's just as we're talking, this is like the greatest skill monkey. I'm just looking down the list. I'm like, I like Rogues too.
But the other masterpiece that sticks out to me is Music Beyond the Spheres. It is a very, very cheap way to get limited wish. without having to pay 1,000 GP.
This is the weird thing with bards, and this extends back to 3rd edition. Splat books do weird things to the bard. Like, I forget what the prestige class was, but there's a bardic prestige class from 3rd edition where you could basically roll a skill check to do that much damage using one of the songs. And I don't know how many people are aware of how you can abuse skill checks in 3rd edition, but the short version is you have bards one-shotting dragons.
I don't recall which prestige class it was, and I don't feel like going through my list to figure it out.
Yeah.
That being said, bardic knowledge back in 3rd edition was busted.
I do want to clarify, like, for everyone listening, those weird, crazy-ass broken builds people come up with, I'm not taking those into account. They're funny, and they're amusing to talk about, and a lot of them do technically work.
Anybody can come up with a crazy-ass build for any of the classes we'll be mentioning tonight. Some more than others, but it's still possible.
Dude, in the early days of Pathfinder, some guy did, like, the leadership feat, a synthesis summoner for his companion who he would use as a mount, and do, like, some ridiculously long charge attack with a full attack, his full attack, and do, like, several thousand damage.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me wrong, that is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
But you're not going to see that stuff in an actual game.
Next on the list, we've got Clerics.
I mean, is there going to be any argument that goes in the S tier?
There was some give and take with Clerics from 3.5 to Pathfinder. Clerics are still S.
Yeah. I guess we probably should at least explain why. I think for most people this will be obvious. They can wear armor without penalties to their spells. They're not bad at just frontlining. They have a ridiculous amount of really good spells from just their divine, plus domains they can pick that'll give them access to some really terrifying arcane spells to add to their list. This isn't even getting into their just, I'm going to do a burst heal, or all the different things they can do with their channel energy.
Channel energy itself is significantly more powerful than Turn Undead was.
Yeah.
They are
the party in and of themselves.
A good amount of the key spells like Divine Power did get nerfed between editions. They don't completely outclass other casters, but they're mostly on par with them, if a little bit more melee capable, that they can do so much shit so well. They are in S.
I can't even really think of a drawback to being a cleric other than people expect you to heal them. Not that you have to. I mean, you can make a completely no-heal cleric with no issue, and I'd still say, yeah, S. Even if you took away a cleric's ability to heal, I'd almost still say they'd be S. They're ridiculous. So, Now, I do want to specify, I get why that's been the case in Dungeons & Dragons, because a lot of these systems, even with their CR, are almost built under the assumption you're going to have some kind of healing capability. But no one wants to be the heal bit. Kind of have to have other things you can do well to make it interesting. I just think they took it a little too far.
There's a reason why I keep taking the piss out of Grognard's. Pathfinder First Edition's cleric doesn't have heavy armor proficiency, although they can easily get it back. And
I swear there's one of their domains grants it to him, doesn't it?
Just all the stuff that clerics can do and do very well. There is no way they're not in S.
And moving right along to the other S of the list, the Druid.
Oh boy. Let's get this out of the way. 3.5 Druids were busted.
Like, I think someone sat down and figured that it's possible that, like just in their wild shape form at higher levels, they're a better fighter than the fighter.
The bustedness can be summed up with one feat. Natural spell. Normally the drawback with wild shape is you can't do spells while in beast form. Not anymore.
Alright. So I'm gonna steal 2 jokes from like some older comic strips of Order in the Stick. I don't know if you ever read those back in the day.
I have.
But they're fighting a druid, and at one point it's like, don't worry, we'll be fine if he didn't take wild shape. Druid doesn't take wild shape. Or wildcast, I should say. Mm-hmm. And the other, and this may be just the worst thing about that class, is the druid states, I have features stronger than your entire class. That's about right.
So, even with the amount of nerfing, because of the amount of stuff that they can do fairly well, I'd still put them in S.
I do want to clarify something to anyone who's not entirely sure on the difference between like Pathfinder and 3E. Well, it's based off the same core D20 system, but a big thing Pathfinder did was expanded what every class could do. So in a sense, druids actually, and even clerics, can do more, but certain things were also dropped down, and other classes were given more to kind of bridge the gap a little bit. At least that was the idea. I think it largely succeeded at it.
I will note that druids could get a lot more deadly when Bestiary 2 came out, because that had the giant hippopotamus. The giant hippo has a bite attack of 4d8, which is already pretty nasty as is. Now throw in the Vital Strike feats. Yeah. So Vital Strike itself, you do you roll double damage, but you can't do the whole full attack thing.
Yeah.
Well, you roll double your damage dice. You're not doing full on double damage in that sense. With Greater Vital Strike, you're rolling 4 times your damage dice. So keep that in mind when I mentioned the 4d8 damage that the giant hippo does.
Here's the thing. I would argue, because of how the system works, that is not a broken ability in and of itself. It's when it's paired with hippo.
Still, that's 16d8 damage.
But but I'm sure you're going to be doing some crazier stuff than the 4d6 times 4 at that point. Especially if you're looking into this stuff for a druid. That said, take away all the weird, cheesy stuff you can do and just the craziness that a druid can get up to. Just look at what he actually does. It is a full caster, so up to 9th level spells. It's divine, so he can wear types of armor. He's got an animal companion, which is actually very handy. He can turn himself into horrifying monsters without wasting his spell slots. He's got a decent skill set. It's like the cleric, there's like nothing bad here. There's no drawbacks, really. And you can pretty much do any role with him. You don't need the crazy Vital Strike feat damage builds to remotely make this guy go into the S tier.
So then we have the fighter, or as he's known in the temple, the feater. I would house rule and rework the 3rd edition fighter so goddamn much because
they become a one-trick pony entirely.
Pretty much. The Pathfinder version is significantly superior, largely because of the passive benefits it gets.
Yeah. Well, part of the passive benefits, and also like the things that boost up your weapon damage that do come passively, apply to multiple weapons. So yeah, your focuses will still apply to specific ones, but you can pick up other weapons with different abilities that give you a bit more versatility in the field.
I'd say the fighter is one of the classes that benefited significantly more from the archetype system.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But it lets you do so much more with your fighter than you ever could in 3rd edition. I'm glad that they expanded feats in Pathfinder, so you get one like every other level normally, so you're not as feat starved, which was kind of even a problem in 3rd edition with all of the extra feats the fighter got.
The skill points you get are abysmal. The fighter's the only class whose skill rate is 2+ intelligence mod.
Couldn't they just give him 4? Would that really be unreasonable to give the fighter 4 skill points?
Now, the tactician archetype does give them some more skill options, and is very good if you have good mental stats, but that's a little bit of a problem that we call MAD, multiple ability dependency.
And we'll be getting to the monks soon.
You need to have good physical and mental scores for an effective tactician. It can be done, but only if you rolled well in your scores, or you have a generous GM, or you have somebody who does not want anybody to have a ability modifier out the gate that's lower than +1, which I've done at times. Later on, especially with stuff like Armor Master and Weapon Master's Handbook, you started to see setups where you could drop one of your weapon or armor training after the first one and get other training options. Versatile training being one of the big ones, where it treated your base attack bonus as skill ranks for 2 skills based on the weapon group. Armored Juggernaut was another good one, which gave DR while wearing armor. And there's also Warrior Spirit, which can give a magic bonus to a weapon temporarily.
All that said, I'm going to say a C, because it's a lot better than the 3rd edition fighter, definitely.
Yeah, but there is the problem of once you're out of combat, that player may as well go to the bathroom or check their phone, because they're not being able to roll much. And for me, if I'm not using a full-on homebrew like I did with the Ultimate series, I will usually just have it that they get some. Their skill points are 4+ Wiz instead of Intelligence. I go with Wiz mostly because of the way I interpret Intelligence and Wisdom. I look at it as the difference between Street Smart and Book Smart.
Yeah.
And of course, I know we weren't going to talk about archetypes, but there's two that I think are worth noting. Those being the Lore Warden and the Martial Master.
I did want to talk Lore Warden because I know if you argue how good a thing is or archetype is, you'd probably rate the Lore Warden fairly low if you're going that route, but fuck that route. I like the Lore Warden.
It does give them some variety. The big reason why I bring up the Lore Warden and Martial Master is because they both are able to add variety in different ways in terms of what you can do. And between the two, I actually think the Martial Master is better, just because of the fact that you can treat your feet spread the way a wizard can treat their spells,
which does a lot.
One of the selling points with the fighter since day one has always been they're able to wield any kind of weapon. For me personally, that doesn't translate to play because just because you can potentially equip any weapon, there's still a particular equipment style that you're going to stick with. Even if you find weapon loot, you are probably going to be hesitant to pick it up unless it fits that particular niche.
Yeah.
If you start out sword and board, you're probably going to end sword and board, and if you pick up, say, an axe, you're probably not going to pick it up.
Now, don't get me wrong, I still think Pathfinder handled this better than 3rd edition, but that does not stop being a problem entirely. This is just something to point out about Pathfinder in general when talking about skills and class skills, is how it handles cross-class and class skills. 3rd edition, once you're past a certain level, skills that aren't class skills for you are just fucked. They scale so badly and low, there is never a reason to invest in them. It's a lot easier with Pathfinder, where rather than you just have your skill ranks, and then a bonus if it is a class skill. Not, you can only put half your ranks in, and every point you put in is only worth half a point.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, just giving them more options for class skills is something like a Lore Warden, with a couple extra skill points that, if I remember right, you have to put into the knowledges.
I would only recommend people go with Lore Warden if they want to mess around with the combat maneuver rules, because that's basically that's their shtick. And also, if you don't want to be the tanky boy, if you want to be the tanky boy with heavy armor, maybe don't go in for Lore Warden, because you're only going to get light armor.
Yeah. Bit of a give and take with any of the archetypes, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
I just like that versatility got added in with these archetypes. It's not enough to raise it above a C, though.
Yeah.
Now, just out of curiosity, assuming we split C into, 2 different ones, I'm not actually going to do that. Would you put Barbarian or Fighter above the other?
If I had to choose between the two, if I'm playing buy or sell, I would buy on the Fighter and I would sell on the Barbarian.
I agree with you on that one. I don't think it's a very close race. But yeah, the Fighter just has more versatility overall.
Well, there's also the way rage works can make you incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
After the rage passes.
I'd say the same thing between Cleric and Druid, but I honest to God have no idea. I think I'd favor Druid. We move on from Fighter to another one of my personal favorites, the Monk. I love monks, but my God, I think they hate me.
If we were talking about the vanilla monk, just using core book only, nothing else, it's a D.
I agree. Part of me wants to put it at C because it does have a lot of versatility. It can do a lot of different things. It kind of depends on how you're doing your stats, though.
The problem is, in 3.5, monks were the poster boy for multiple ability dependency. They don't have this issue as much in Pathfinder 1st edition, but it is still present.
The key point stuff is helping a lot. Just being able to have your fists count as magical weapons is helping a lot. Doesn't change the fact every stat is important, except for charisma.
Mm-hmm. If you start bringing in the archetypes, then it starts getting better, because I'd say if not the most, the monk probably has more archetypes than anyone else.
Kind of needed it to salvage it, as much as I hate to say.
Even though some of it is just integrating features from other classes, like how the sensei is the bastard child of a monk with bardic performance. I do get some enjoyment of the drunken monk being able to generate ki from alcohol, which is on point.
It's always a great archetype.
But I would say the standout archetype is Zen Archer.
Yes.
Hitting
that monk damage at a range helps.
Well, not only that, but you get to use your wisdom for hitting with the bow. So all that you'd mostly need Dex for is just putting it at 13 so you can get feats. You have full BAB when using bow, and a lot of the archery feats that you'd need you're going to get for free.
Yeah, it's
I've
never played a Zen Archer because when I'm a monk I want to be up there punching and breaking faces. Mm-hmm. But even I know that. If you're just arguing efficiency, it's hard to beat the Zen Archer for any monk archetype.
Yeah, big problem is the War Priest basically acts as the War Priest, especially with Scaled Fist archetype, is a better monk than the monk. But as I mentioned, we're not putting the hybrid classes in this. So even though somebody who knows what they're doing can bump the monk up to a B with the archetypes, I've got to put it at a D.
With archetypes, just because you do also have stuff that swaps out like element or swaps out stunning for elemental, so you can help supplement damage just by switching that over to wisdom instead of strength, basically. So you have one less stat to worry about. I think I'd put it at C if we're taking into account archetypes, but that is not a very strong case to make as a C, so I am fine putting one of my favorite classes as a D.
The Unchained Monk, I actually consider that a C.
I'm not entirely sure on that one, just because it's one of those things I don't know if a lot of people think about. Like, the one thing that a monk is always really, really good at is it's got a high AC typically, or at least a decent one. Its touch AC is fantastic compared to any other class, and all 3 base saves. Unchained loses the wisdom, but
it does have full BAB, and instead of doing the diminishing returns flurry of blows, you just have one full BAB attack.
That's what I'm saying. And I don't have like a strong case on this one. I think it's kind of on the line either way you go. If we're going Unchained, I think it's kind of on the line. If we're just taking the archetypes into account, I'd put it on the line of C and D.
Stuff like the way key powers and style strikes, and the fact that the Unchained Monk has gotten archetype support. So
I think indisputably it is a very versatile class. It doesn't really specialize in something, so it doesn't quite fit the tier description we gave. But there's no way in hell it's going to be like a B, A, or S.
No,
I'm not putting this side by side with the Bard.
No, I just felt it was something to note.
Yeah.
But next up we have the Paladin.
It's another one I think they did much better with in this edition, though I think I'll be repeating that for pretty much every class.
Casting off of charisma instead of wisdom was a smart move.
So they don't just jump their charisma.
Two, smiting for days. A softened code of conduct meant that you had less opportunities of that guy.
But yes.
That said, the Paladin is still a C because he's too specialized. If you've got evil enemies, the Paladin is going to rip and tear like a holy buzzsaw.
Again, I don't think he's terrible if you're not fighting evil. He still has a lot of good stuff going for him, but
we have a low ass skill points. So
here's the thing, like conceptually, I love like your paladins from older editions of D&D. I hate this. Oh, you can be the conquest paladin. No, fuck you. They're my paragon of good. Damn it, that's my paladin.
But much like with the monk, paladins got a lot of love when it came to archetypes.
Yeah,
some of them are simple, like Divine Hunter, for those who want to be a paladin but be ranged instead of melee. Or you've got some of the more ridiculous stuff like Sacred Servant, which could shoot you all the way up to an A if you know what you're doing. Mostly because Sacred Servant gives you a free planar ally and more casting.
I also like they have. We'll get into this in Ranger 2 in a bit, but if you're going to give someone like a spell list, at least make sure they got some good stuff on that spell list. By the time they get first level spells in like 3rd edition, holy shit, I don't know why they gave them a spell list.
Yeah,
they're so terrible. You got some good unique paladin spells, like eventually the Inquisitor could use these too, but like the litanies that were nice.
Mm-hmm.
I know they started doing a thing where certain classes would get like higher level spells, but at a lower level, even though they get that lower level later. So they get the same effect, but with a lower DC to overcome. Kind of help balance that out a bit, and give your non-full casters a little bit of extra oomph. That was nice. But you're still not playing a paladin because of some fantastic spell list. It's just kind of like a nice little thing they have on hand. I have no issues dropping them down in C.
Next we have the, unequivocally, with no debate, I will hear nothing on this, the Ranger is the most snake-bitten class in both D&D and Pathfinder, and has been since day one.
I hate how these classes get made, because I like the Ranger idea. There's some good stuff here, but holy shit. Favorite enemy has been one of the banes of this class, among other things.
I have stated in the past that I think the reason favorite enemy has the reputation it does is I honestly think it's working backwards from how it should. Because the problem that I have with favorite enemy is like a lot of those kind of effects. It's only going to have an impact if the creature type in this case is actually in the campaign. Meaning in order for it to be viable, the GM has to work with it in mind. That's a bit of a gamble to be putting on your GM.
Yeah. That said, it's worse than the Paladins. Smite Evil shit. It's so much worse than Smite Evil. Not even the effect itself, just how limiting it is.
There are going to be more monsters that have evil alignment than are going to have a certain creature type.
Specific campaigns, it might work. Like when one of my guys made a ranger at one time when one of his characters died, there was kind of a theme that was going on overall where they were caught between a war of devils and demons. And since you can at least pick multiple favorite enemies in Pathfinder, thank Christ, it's like, oh, I know I can pick these two, and I'm going to be able to use them.
Of course. The other thing is, I've gotten into some arguments about this, but I've never been fond of the idea of rangers being able to cast spells simply because the class fantasy of the ranger doesn't quite fit that.
I'm right there with you.
Apparently, Paizo agreed with me because when Pathfinder 2nd Edition came out, they dropped casting for rangers.
I will give 1st Edition Paizo this for Pathfinder. Much like the Paladin, at least they got a solid spell list that they could actually make use of.
You know how we mentioned that the monk is kind of outclassed by one of the hybrids?
Yeah.
We have a similar thing with the ranger because we already have a better version of the ranger in the Slayer.
Another thing I'll give Paizo is this. It didn't help as much as it did with, say, the monk and paladin, but archetypes did do the ranger some good. There are a good number of archetypes that will swap out favorite enemy for abilities you can actually use.
As far as why the ranger is so snake bitten, a lot of it comes down to the fact that the fantasy of this outdoorsy character doesn't quite work when 9 times out of 10 you're going to be in dungeons. And some of the archetypes that let them be trap makers was cute, but that's assuming that you're going to have prep time to actually set up traps and ambushes and the like.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 you're not.
Now, I will say, like, one thing a lot of, like, I've always done, like, when I was running 3D games, it never came up when I ran Pathfinder. We just set up a simple house rule to help them out. Get rid of your spell list. Animal companion is a druid's. I mean, it clearly doesn't fix every issue here, but you're getting rid of one worthless feature and making a feature that was kind of shit on them good. Like, it's another change for anyone who's unaware from Pathfinder, like 3rd edition Ranger. You treat your level as half for determining your animal companion is a druid. This does not work.
No.
Pathfinder, they just do that kind of plus or minus 3 thing like with the skills. You treat your level as 3 lower, which is a lot better. Still not perfect, but your companion can actually do stuff now.
Mm-hmm. But next we have the rogue.
God, it's such a classic class that everyone would think of. I'd be hard pressed to put it above D. I'm not sure your thought on that one.
It's on the high end of it, but I think a rogue is a C. It's not bad. It's not bad enough to be a D, and there isn't as much mad issue. The big problem is that as mentioned earlier, they kind of get outclassed in the skill monkey thing because of versatile performance.
Yeah.
Also, whoever decided that you can't sneak attack with splash weapons, I want you to be keelhauled.
Yeah. Yeah, there's
The rogue talents thing is nice. A lot of the rogue talents just aren't good. Just aren't good enough to warrant.
I think you could have cut that off as just not good.
The Unchained Rogue is significantly better. However,
I would not put it at B.
It's on the high end of C, but not quite high enough.
Yeah.
And this was a really dumb. Who decided that concealment should block sneak attack? Because that was a really dumb thing, and fortunately, the Unchained Rogue doesn't have that problem.
Yeah. I get it, but I think it depends on the type of concealment.
With the Unchained Rogue, partial concealment didn't block sneak attack.
I'm fine putting Rogue then at C, because again, I agree with you. Unchained's definitely there. I don't quite agree with you on the regular Rogue going into C, but I can see a case for it.
Yeah. I will, however, note the Eldritch Scoundrel archetype, which was a late addition. You lose a bit of your sneak attack, all of your armor, half your skill points. Though if you've got high int, you can negate that. Half your rogue talents in your first uncanny dodge, but you turn into a arcane trickster.
I will say as a side note too, I really like that there's feats that let you swap out like sneak attack dice for debilitating effects.
Those were nice because of how it's set up. It can't really shine in any area, so that's why I can see why you'd put it at D. I'm a little more generous in putting it at C. It is borderline though.
It's kind of like how I am with the monk. Like it's still borderline. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I will go ahead and drop that in C then.
I do think Rogue's got a better shake in Pathfinder 2nd Edition though. They actually can be skill monkeys again.
Look, they're still solid skill monkeys. It's just there's the bard who can dance, meaning he can do your shit better than you can.
So next we have the sorcerer, not to be confused with his horse, sorcerer.
I certainly wouldn't feel right putting this next to the cleric and druid.
Now the sorcerer is not as broken as Godzilla. The sorcerer could go up and down depending on your choice of bloodline.
There's some fantastic bloodlines.
Mm-hmm.
There's some what the fuck were you thinking bloodlines.
They're not as versatile as the wizard, obviously, but the problem that happened with sorcerers early on, and the reason why apparently Skip Williams hated sorcerers, is that despite the intentions, they came off like a gimped version of wizards. The whole not needing to prepare your spells didn't quite translate.
Like, I still think that's a nice little feature of them, but like the whole point of these big spell lists is versatility.
Yeah.
And they just didn't have it compared to the wizard. Like, I'm glad they get more spells per day than the wizard, but that's not enough to overcome just being able to grab anything you want to solve the situation. But we'll get more into wizard specifically in a minute. Yeah.
The lack of spells compared to a wizard isn't as much of a problem because of the free spells you get through Bloodline.
That does help.
And the fact that a good chunk of the races can grant you a bonus spell as the favored class bonus. And of course, then there was the build your own spells thing from Ultimate Magic.
I usually like those in premise more than practice.
Words of Power was pretty good, and for once we had an alternate casting system that favored sorcerers over the overly spoiled wizards. Sorcerers have a lot of synergy with multi-classing into Oracle. Put them at an A.
Yeah, that's a good solid spot for them. They're clearly above the stuff like Bard, but they're clearly lacking behind the other crazy full casters.
I will note a few things. Dragon Disciple can be a real threat if left unchecked. I will note that the Rasmirian Priest archetype for sorcerers is one big wheel of cheese, because they can cast any cleric spell as long as they have a magic item with the spell. That's one that is a good way to piss off your GM. If you're a half elf sorcerer, Paragon Surge is a good idea to go with.
I will say, like, my favorite sorcerer bloodline is Hag, or whichever one the Hag's related to, just because that spell list is just fucking with your enemy. It's like stuff like Eye Bite, just kind of mean-spirited spells like that, and it speaks to me.
I will admit, Sorcerer is a tricky one to. I put him at A, but Sorcerer is a tricky one to grade because of the sheer amount of changes that Bloodline can go with. Can put it in so many different directions,
and some of the weird interactions. Like I ran one game just to see if it was really as nutty as it sounded like it might be, but I did a Efreeti, the Fire Elemental race Sorcerer. They get the bonus to Charisma. But they also treat their charisma as 2 higher for purposes of their sorcerer spells if they have the right bloodline. And it's one of the alternate racial feats that were in one of the books. I forget which book introduced those. So I'm a level 1 with an effective 22 charisma as a sorcerer. The DM doesn't like having to make these kind of saves.
Now for the last of our base classes, the Wizard. Or to quote, or in Discworld, the Wizard. Yes, it requires that many Z's.
Now, on one hand, I don't think it quite stacks up to the Cleric and Druid, just in terms of versatility, weirdly enough. I would still be tempted to put it in S, if not call it a very high A.
The Wizard is an S.
Yeah.
I say the Wizard didn't change too much because the Wizard was already ridiculous enough as it was.
Yeah.
I'd say the main change was the whole opposition school thing. Instead of being completely blocked off, it just requires 2 spell slots, and the whole thing with cantrips being moved to at will, which nobody's going to have a problem with. The idea of cantrips requiring a spell slot was fucking stupid.
I half agree with you, just because I don't like some of the spells that became cantrips. I don't like light being a cantrip because my party can just go, oh, I guess we just don't need torches anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, fuck you, you're exploring a dungeon. That is not a cantrip. Plus, they got all those extra casts per day from, like, their school abilities. Like, I like the idea of just having some weak cantrips. I just don't like the selection of spells that are cantrips.
Would you be the type that would argue that you should be spending a spell slot for Detect Magic?
I don't really care too much about that one. You can have that one for free, I guess. There's situations in which I think it's a little annoying. It's not like Light, where just... oh, we're just going to completely remove an aspect of travel at no cost. That irritated me. But yeah, Detect Magic, it's fine. Yeah, I have no problem slotting a Wizard in S. It's clearly better than the Sorcerer, as much as I like the Sorcerer. Like, this is one of those things, I don't think that it was as big of a drawback as they thought that their spellbook, they kind of need it, whereas a Wizard doesn't need anything. Now, at first you're like, alright, that gives a Wizard a vulnerability. Something the DM can mess with a little bit, but at the same time, are you really just going to take away your player's, like, entire existence? Maybe for brief periods, but too much stuff is tied to that spell book that you can't really take it away from the player without them just going like, I guess I'm just waiting for someone to get my book back for me. So it's a drawback that's never really going to apply.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, like, it's also one of the things that in Pathfinder that's definitively holding that Wizard at a higher spot than the Sorcerer is they got the option of, instead of their familiar, to have that item on hand, and you can use it to cast out any spell from your spell book once a day. It's like, well, that kind of takes away the whole prepared nature, like, because if something comes up that they're not expecting, well, I guess they have an answer for it now as long as it exists somewhere in that spell book. It's just another one of those things that's kind of chipping away at what's supposed to make the Sorcerer kind of unique in that way. Look, this may be my go-to game, but I still have some issues. Yeah, so that pretty much takes care of all of the core classes.
Yep. Now we get to the interesting classes, and we start out with one that I love.
I love the Alchemist. All right, this isn't a mechanical thing, but like my sister doesn't really play RPGs often, but we did have her in a game where she was playing an alchemist, and she was basically she was like grabbing all kinds of weird, crazy stuff to make these little concoctions of hers.
So
a very prototypical, like just mad gnomish alchemist, but it was a blast.
Okay, let me get this out of the way. Alchemists are a B.
I have no problem with that.
There's a few things that they're very good at, and outside of that, they're still pretty decent, especially with the extracts. Yeah. You're going to be expected to be familiar with two things: Potions and mutagens. Okay, that's the partial lie. There's 3 pillars that you have to deal with when it comes to alchemists. First is alchemical bombs, which are your splash weapons, i.e., friendly fire is an oxymoron. Then there's extracts, which is your potions, and then there's mutagens. Did you ever read the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? and just to go into the crazy route, then we have discoveries.
Now, I do want to clarify something in regards to mutagen. That I know a lot of people kind of missed reading it the first time just because it didn't sound like it should work this way. It raises one of your stats, lowers one of them. The one it's lowering is treated as ability damage. When that mutagen wears off, that stat doesn't immediately go back up. Mm-hmm. So you're taking a little more of a hit with these mutagens than you might initially think. So you do want to process when it is you're using these a bit more than just, ooh, I can make use of this now.
Yeah, throw anything is a lot of fun to utilize as an alchemist.
Like, they're a lot of fun, and you can do so many things with an alchemist.
Yeah.
Like, this is something I like about the system in general compared to 3rd edition, is the proliferation of 6th level spellcasters.
Mm-hmm.
Originally, we just had the Bard. Now we got stuff like Alchemist, and some more that we'll be covering.
Yeah, even though they're not at the highest tier, alchemists are pure fun to mess around with.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's helped them be so popular. That and the fact that it's something that a lot of people when they put in fantasy this is the problem when it comes to the way people see fantasy, of always seeing it as a Lord of the Rings pastiche. Yeah. So the idea of doing crazy science stuff in a fantasy setting doesn't occur to them when it should.
Another thing I do want to note about the Alchemist, it can be a little fun for the DM, a lot more than, say, the Wizard's Spellbook, because those extracts you're making, like, the game treats them as spells, just for purpose of, like, your spell lists and known, just to keep things consistent. But what you're actually doing is, like, making little potions that only you can drink. Unless you have the discovery to prepare potions other people can drink. People can steal, like, individual extracts.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you've prepared an extract other people can drink, and someone happens to steal, like, a spell slot effectively rather than an entire book, they might have some weird consequences of drinking it that they weren't expecting.
Most of the time, people focus on 2 builds. Either a support controller build, typically with the mind chemist archetype, since that means they won't deal with poison friendly fire, or the full-on buff alchemists, who will usually take vivisectionist, to which you lose bombs when taking vivisectionist, but you do get sneak attack.
Yeah.
And that of course brings up, I've seen some people creatively interpret that so that they can have sneak attack, so that they can have some interesting uses of sneak attack poisoning. Although there is a part of me that will always want to try and do a build that is all about sneak attack bombs. Of course, if you want to get really stupid, just give your alchemist the simulacrum spell. You take that, you go all the way up to S, because not only can you do all that stuff, but you also get a tanky clone that follows your commands. Who can hit like a truck.
Yeah. Like, at first, it seems the class might be a bit more limiting because, again, without this specifically preparing your extracts for other people, all of your spells are self-targeting.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start realizing the sheer versatility of the things you can give yourself, like, that is a very solid spell list that gives you, like, beast forms, dragon breath, all kinds of really fun buff spells.
Yep. Let's not forget about Enlarged Person.
Well, obviously, yeah. It is so much fun to play around with. There are so many, like, different things you can do with them that are viable.
Mm-hmm.
This is just a well-built class, like, bottom to top. If we were just ranking classes by some of the ones I have the most fun with, this would probably be an S.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a fantastic class.
But next up, we're going from the highs to the lows. Okay. So let's talk about the Cavalier.
I'm going to point out one thing now. Mm-hmm. This is the worst kind. Like, they have so many abilities on their core that involve riding their animal companion. if you are not a small creature, you have a large animal companion. A lot of dungeons are going to be a pain in the ass unless the DM's designing around you being able to get a large creature in everywhere.
Now, I want to note as a historian, Cavaliers have not been a class since AD&D. The Cavalier in Pathfinder was used as the foundation for the Samurai class, and it is better than Cavalier was in AD&D, but only because it's a 2-trick pony instead of a 1-trick pony. I like the knightly orders more than I do the Paladin's Code of Conduct.
Yes.
Simply because it's a little bit more flexible and you don't have that guy moments.
Yeah.
Instead of becoming a blackguard when you violate it, you might just lose some of the weaker abilities for a day.
Don't get me wrong, I still really like the Paladin Code, and I am happy it's a bit more vague in Pathfinder, but this is a lot less restrictive.
Yeah.
With your codes.
Granted,
less punishing.
Challenge is a gimp smite.
It's a horrible ability.
Its main advantage is not having target restrictions.
Well, it doesn't give your opponent target restrictions either until high levels.
The problem is, once you get past first level, all the customization goes down. Yeah. Way down.
And considering that was one of the purported strengths of Pathfinder, that's a problem.
Beast Rider is all but mandatory.
There is a big problem, I think, with trying to make a mounted focused class in a game where that's not at all the normal.
If I'm being honest, if they had focused more on the tactician and banner stuff that Cavalier has and just dropped the mounted stuff, I think Cavalier would have been a better class, because it's like they were trying to do what the Warlord in 4th edition was doing and the Commander in 13th Age, but because of the fact that they had to throw in that whole being on a mount thing, it isn't able to get the full attention it needs.
Like, even if you go the cheesy route and pick a small character, you're still kind of limited.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're normal size and you're out in the open where you can make use of your mount, the bonuses aren't that great.
Also, for whatever reason, and this is a case of somebody was stupid, no knowledge skills in the skill list.
Oh God, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, if you're like a gnome or just a small character, maybe I'd be willing to put them at a C. But
I wouldn't like even the cheesy ways I've seen some people try to make this work. I don't think I would put them at a C. Like, with one possible exception we'll get to, I think just this is one of the worst designed classes.
Yeah. So next is the Inquisitor.
This goes right from worst design to one of my favorites. I love the Inquisitor so much.
I'd put the Inquisitor as a B. I would put the Inquisitor as a B. It's able to do a good amount of things, but its stuff doesn't synergize, and its spell list is not exactly something to write home about.
Yes and no. It has a couple absolutely fantastic spells. Like Wrath, that is a great first level spell. It scales quite well. There's no save against it, but you get to pick your target for all those bonuses.
Yeah.
Like, I would put it at a very strong B, but I would not put it in.
I will say that being able to grant Bane to your weapons actually makes Inquisitors on some levels a better ranger than the ranger.
Yeah. Like, I don't think there's a better class of this game at isolating a single target and going, fuck you.
Mm-hmm. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the living grimoire archetype from Horror Adventures, where you get to beat your enemies to death with a big ass holy book.
I think it's a good spell list. It's got a couple absolute bangers in there.
Yeah.
Especially since like the Paladin, they have access to the litanies, which is a big bonus for any kind of class that has spells, but is still mostly like a martial.
Mm-hmm.
The Banes are great. Very solid skill list.
I know that they can get access to cleric domains, but without the bonus spells, there's not as much of a reason to do it.
They're nice.
If I'm being I actually prefer picking Inquisitions, which gives you some far more interesting tricks.
Yeah. Like, I also like having a guy that's not the bard who is also, or bard or wizard, who is also really good at having access to different knowledges.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fun thing to add in, especially like if you're a newer player who's not aware of like all the different monster stuff that's out there that you just kind of know by heart. You have all this different knowledge to learn all this different stuff. It doesn't just tie it to intelligence because you can add your wisdom modifier for identifying creatures.
As an aside, it's kind of funny that that the Inquisitor is in pop culture is known for screaming "It's a witch," when in reality, Inquisitors really didn't give a shit about witches.
That said, I think what kind of keeps them out of like being an arguable A tier is they do kind of fall into that mad category. Like, yes, they can do a lot of stuff, a lot of it well. And if you're doing like a very high point buy game, or you get like a lot of really hot rolls, they're kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
Of course, the same can be said with the monk, but you kind of need that to make them terrifying.
I'd say you can go into Inquisitor relatively blind and come out decent.
Yes, they got enough abilities that are very handy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas monk, you need to know a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would call Inquisitor my favorite class. Like, playing in games, playing as that Inquisitor was like some of the most fun I had. It was not the most optimized build, but it was basically no, we're not asking questions, we're not wasting time. That door, I don't care if you can pick it. It gets smashed down, we got a goal to get to. There was a lot of broken stuff in that person's building. That they did not really... They would have preferred me to have not broken, but that wasn't part of it. I was there to find a guy.
So...
But yes.
Next is the Oracle, which... The Oracle, I think can be best described as the divine sister to the sorcerer.
Very much so.
They have spontaneous casting. They don't get channel energy, but they do get mysteries, and they get revelations, which can allow for some interesting combinations. The mysteries are all over the place. You do have a very good narrative thing with the Oracle's curse.
Well, yes, it's one of those things that exist for people to try to min-max and break sometimes. I do like the premise of the curse.
I'd say one advantage they have over clerics is they can cast spells opposite of alignment.
Yes.
I would say oracles are an A. If you know what you're doing, you can break the game with them. But because of the fact that they don't have all that many spells, they're not at S.
Definitely not an S. Like, I'd put them a little on the lower end of A, but I think that's a good strong spot for them.
Next we got Summoner.
God damn, I hate the Summoner. Fucking hate this. Okay, I hate the core Summoner. Now, I'm gonna be very straight with how I feel about this. It's not that it's broken. It's that it's just annoying to deal with early levels. Because, like, it's one of the things some people have an issue with, like, if, say, a Barbarian is in the party at first level, is they have so many hit points compared to everybody else. Like, you gotta have something that can hit them to make them feel a little threatened. But anything that's gonna make them threatened has a chance to just straight one-shot some other classes. Now, it's not horrible to deal with, a little bit annoying. Well, now I got 3 hit dice over here to fucking deal with at first level. Worse if they take the Synthesis Summoner. Or the absolute worst thing you can do with the Summoner is the Master Summoner class. Like, not trying to break it. Playing that class as intended is them spamming the field with guys, which slows everything to a crawl. This class, the core class, so much.
Yeah. Now, the original Summoner is an A. I know you hate it, but because of how ridiculously it's powerful in its niches it could be, it has to be an A. The Unchained the Unchained Summoner is a little bit more fair.
I think I'd still call it an A.
I'd say it's a B up until 19th level when you get Gate. Then it's right back up to A.
Here's the thing. These class, like, it's fun to play. I had a couple people play it, It's actually not bad depending on who it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm straight up saying I won't allow a synthesis or master summoner. It's too annoying, but yes, it's so good.
After Unchained came out, Paizo stopped supporting the vanilla summoner. Unlike some of the other Unchained classes, which were side grades or downgrades, the summoner became mandatory.
Yeah. I like the idea. Paizo has not always had the best reputation with execution.
So next is the witch.
See, this is one of those things, like, if we weren't including archetypes at all, there's one thing that I think makes the witch class just a nightmare to play, and that is one of its core class features is having an animal companion, which is also its spell book. You're never going to use your animal companion in combat because if it dies, you're fucked.
Witches have a much broader spectrum of magic that they can use instead of just being able to use arcane magic.
Yes.
And it's not as versatile as a wizard, but a witch can do things wizards can't, like heals and curses.
The hexes are fantastic.
I would say the witch is an A.
I'd call it an A bordering on an S. Like, I would not blame anyone at dropping the witch in the S class, but I do think A is a bit better suited for it.
Yeah.
I'd put it at the lower end of A were it not for the archetypes, just because tying a spell book to a class feature like an animal companion, I think is a terrible idea. Because you lose all your spells if that thing dies. Meaning you might as well just write that class feature out of the character. Otherwise, yeah, we'd just be rehashing stuff we've said about, like, wizard and sorcerer. Same basic idea.
Yeah. Although I will say that a witch who's out of spell slots isn't going to be as useless as a wizard who's out of spell slots.
Yes.
Mostly because hexes don't count as spells.
One thing, like, if they did an errata this, I might have been tempted to push for S. There was a witch archetype which made con your casting stat.
Have you ever heard the legend of the muscle wizard? Con as your casting stat makes me think of the muscle wizard.
But no, it's like, just by making that the casting stat, you have fixed two of the drawbacks of a lot of full casters. Low HP, miserable fort saves. I mean, you're still not going to have barbarian HP or anything, but con's now your highest stat. So your HP is going to be comparable with some of your melee guys. Or classes that are supposed to be up there. And you no longer have an absolutely abysmal fort save. It's like, yeah, I don't know why they thought that was a good idea.
Next, we have the gunslinger. I really do think that more fantasy settings or more generic fantasy games should implement the idea of tech levels into their core book.
I know Cromor did it. I can't think of too many others. But I like the idea of the gunslinger. I do think it has a place in a fantasy setting.
I would say that gunslingers at low levels they're tier 5. At higher levels they can be tier 4. They can throw they have a lot of spike damage is the issue. Of course, the other issue is how available your setting is going to have when it comes to guns. Yep. Some people don't like having the changes of firearms in their fantasy setting. I don't agree with that, but it is an issue. It's a little bit easier to manage if you have the bolt ace archetype that moves you from guns to crossbows.
My only contention is I don't really like how Pathfinder did guns. It almost feels like weirdly lazy. It's like, oh yeah, closer range or within that first range, they're touch attacks. Okay. But at the same time, like, you're not even if you're hitting more consistently because of that, it still doesn't really match the damage of, like, your fighters, your barbarians, or inquisitor, or anything really.
Yeah, the thing is, because of the way reload works, you have a false choice issue where you're going to need rapid reload if you don't get it with your archetype, and probably craft alchemy so that you can make alchemical ammunition. But one thing that I am not a fan of when it comes to the way firearms work, especially with the gunslinger, is misfires.
If you take misfires out entirely, I still wouldn't rank this guy higher than like your fighter and barbarian.
Mm-hmm.
Adding
When
that
the
in,
big, well, they have the same problem. They're going to be really good once it comes out to dishing out damage. But outside of that, they're not going to be all that great.
yeah. And again, they're not even like comparable to some of this other stuff in damage dishing. Like they're okay at it.
Mm-hmm. So
I drop them in D.
yeah, I will admit that the spell cartridges feat makes for a very easy Gish gunslingers, and some of the archetypes can give them some better versatility, but again, you still have the same problem.
Yeah, like I like having the crossbow archetype because one, I think the crossbows as is just work better. You don't have the misfire nonsense that are currently on guns.
Mm-hmm. So next we have the Magus.
This is a weird one for me to try to judge for some reason because it's basically just melee damage through your blade, but magical damage.
Magus is Pathfinder's definitive Gish.
Like I like it. It can be a lot of fun.
It is basically a better blade singer or sword mage. One of the things that certainly makes it that is spell combat. The arcane pool is their version of key, but
it's another thing with them. Like they don't have a whole lot of versatility. You're a magus. Here's what to do: enchant your blade, cut some bitches. Maybe shock and burn them while you're cutting them.
Mm-hmm.
Better than just a normal magic sword because you can alter the types of damage and effects off it. But that's basically all you're doing.
Well, at second level for Magus, you can use your weapon to deliver touch attack spells.
Don't you still have to strike normally though? I don't know if it. I don't remember if it's treated as a touch attack.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question: do you get your normal blade damage when doing it like that, or are you just literally just tapping him with your blade?
Well, a good combo is to use this and use shocking grasp, especially if you've got a high crit weapon like a scimitar.
Alrighty, yeah. So they're very good at what they do.
Mm-hmm. I would put them as a B. They've got a lot of stuff they can do well, but they're not going to But they still have a slower spell rate compared to wizards. Their spells cap at 6th level.
Yeah. See, I'd be more inclined to keep them down at the C tier for the Magus. It's again, they just don't have that kind of versatility we're seeing in like some of the other B tiers. And I don't see them as that high above like our other Cs.
The downside with them is just the lacking in raw power. That's why I put them as a B.
Pulling them up real quick because I do want to check something on their skills too. Because I think they're down with fighter skills, 2+ intelligence. Now they are intelligence based for their spells, so you're going to be more versatile than say the fighters in that regards. But what are their skills actually? They got a decent skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Fort and Will. Yeah, that'd be all right putting them at D or B, not D.
But next is the Shifter, which came around in Ultimate Wilderness.
Okay, this is one I didn't know about until this list, but I looked at its abilities and I'm like, all right, this isn't something I'm going to have to learn anything all that new for. So I have been like looking over the Shifter the past few days. The fuck is this thing? Like, it looks terrible.
The idea with the Shifter ostensibly is supposed to be that they're people who want to double down on wild shape but don't want the messiness of druid casting. That they're supposed to be they're advertised as rookie friendly or the newbie druid.
I mean, I'll give him this. It's a very simple class.
But because of the fact that natural weapons don't scale very well in terms of damage, even with their full BAB, that's one of the things that works against them. There's also the fact that even with the shifting, a lot of the crazier shifting that druids can do, shifters can't. Like, say, shifting into elementals.
And I was looking through their aspects. Because for anyone unaware of the Shifter, which I actually think a lot of people who played Pathfinder probably don't know too much about this one, because it did not get a lot of people talking. Like, for so many minutes per day, you can take on a minor form. Eventually you get the major form of whatever aspects you have chosen, which are limited in your aspect numbers, by the way. So you can't even shape into more stuff than a druid can. But let's ignore that for a second. Let's look at these great abilities you get access to. Dark vision. That's basically all with the bat. Higher levels, that becomes a short blind set, which is quite nice, but it's not that great. A stat bonus while you're in certain forms. It's fine. Die hard. Bonus feat while you're a boar. Okay. None of these are impressive. I'm looking over these. These are not good abilities. They are okay at best.
And they tried to errata the shit out of the thing to make it work better.
This is a D, right? Is there any argument that this could possibly be higher than a D, or am I missing something?
Yeah, I'd say that they are a D. You could probably move them up to a C with certain archetypes, but we don't count that.
Again, I'll take archetypes into consideration to a degree. The amount of things I am looking at that you would have to change on this thing. I can't even imagine making this thing as good as a fighter at just fighting and nothing else. These abilities are terrible. What can this thing do other than slap someone in the face moderately well? I feel like I have to be missing something.
Did I mention that they did not get extra attacks with natural weapons?
Yeah. They don't even have a good will save. Mm-hmm. You would think someone who's mentally controlling and altering their body at will would have a good will save.
Mm-hmm.
You could give them a good will save, and that wouldn't even phase my view of this class. This is a very solid D.
Yeah. Last but certainly not least, we've got the Vigilante.
How do we quantify this one?
This one is kind of tricky because you're essentially playing two characters at once.
Here's my issue with just trying to judge the Vigilante, and because when you look at the flavor of the Vigilante, the abilities, the renounce system, it seems to be created for a very specific kind of game, which is fine. But when I was looking into it a little bit, over on the Paizo forums, one of the creators said, "Oh no, you can put this in any kind of campaign." What? No. So if I'm if I'm judging it like he said, and you can throw it into basically any kind of campaign, maybe you can make an argument for a C.
I put them at D. If you bring in the spellcasting archetypes, they move up to a C.
That's what I'm you can probably make an argument for C.
But the weird thing about them is that they're kind of the reverse of what we usually see. A lot of times we see characters that excel at combat but struggle outside of it. They have it the other way around.
Again, if you're putting them in the setting they seem to be intended for, that's fine.
If you are doing an urban fantasy campaign, they're gonna be an easier sell because the Vigilante. I know people like to say that the Vigilante is for the Batman XP. I'd say he has more in common with characters like the Phantom or Doc Savage, or even the Shadow, those old school pulp vigilante heroes.
Oh yeah, I think Batman just gets thrown out because more people know that name, but yeah.
Well, no, more people should read more comics outside of the big two. I suppose I could also throw in the Green Hornet or some of the street level heroes you see in the big two. First off, you have these subtypes about whether or not you want to be a stalker or an avenger. But if I'm being honest, stalkers kind of suck. I mean, they just get a shittier version of sneak attack with hidden strike. And some of the rogue talents, but I've mentioned I'm not the biggest fan of rogue talents. Whereas Avengers get full BAB and get some better armor mobility. The thing when it comes to the Vigilante is we've talked about a shitload of options. The Vigilante embodies this quite a bit because you're developing both the base side of it as well as the mask side of it. That's why I say that using this as the Batman class is kind of unfair. That you are playing both Batman and Bruce Wayne.
My issue here is should this even be in Pathfinder?
I think it can be, especially if you consider Actually, the best analog to use for the vigilante, Zorro.
Yeah, but it's more you got Zorro and this other troop of people who are on the same level of Zorro traveling around. Like, it just feels so put into a certain style of game. I think it works in that.
Like I said, if you are doing a more urban campaign, it's certainly going to be working. But I wouldn't use this for, say, Keep on the Borderlands, if you follow me. But it got a lot of third-party support, so apparently it struck a chord with some folk.
Yeah,
I'd say that covers all the ones we wanted to cover.
pretty sure. Taking a quick look at the list, and yep, that covers them.
Mm-hmm. This was a fun thing to go back.
Yeah.
This was a fun thing to go back on.
Oh yeah,
and I say it's good. I say even though the podcast is built on doing a lot of stuff with anime, it's good to dip into other things.
Oh yeah, it's fun to take a break once in a while.
And I'm probably going to send you the wiki for Spheres of Power, which takes the casting system of Pathfinder, puts it on its head, and dials up the customization.
I'm aware of Spheres of Power, but it's never something I've sat down and examined that much.
I plan on once I get my PC back up and running, I do plan on doing a video going into detail on Spheres of Power, nice. Because it's a system that I want to use for future projects.
Well,
I mean,
I'd say now's probably a good time to wrap this up because I gotta be to work at 6:30 in the morning. I got like 50+ hour work weeks coming up.
Oof.
Yeah, just don't work in a kitchen, people. Just don't. Yeah, you'll be able to catch any of the stuff either me or Mildra are working on in the whatever the fuck that YouTube box is called, the description. Look, I'm gonna be straight with you. To knock myself out, I took a little bit of ZQL just a little bit ago, and that's starting to hit me. So I'm starting to get a little weird in the head. Someone,
weirder.
People just put your own ending here. I'm stopping the recording now.